Hello my dear friends, you're in the MilitarySummary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 3rd of June of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kharkiv direction, where we received significant number of details and updates. As we discussed during the previous 24 hours, the Russians were redeploying significant number of forces from one part of, let's say, territory of Russian Federation to another, and that convoy was discovered by the Ukrainian, let's say, forces, and as a result of significant number of FPV drone strikes, that convoy was destroyed. The Russians were trying to save the convoy, trying to stretch the forces between the tree lines, but they couldn't, let's say, save the vehicles and equipment. The Ukrainians destroyed everything. When talking about Kharkiv direction itself, we also received significant number of videos. For example, on this video, according to Ukrainian sources, the Ukrainians, as a result of RECO operation, managed to discover the warehouse of Iskander missiles, and as a result of HIMARS strike, that warehouse was destroyed. So as you can see, after the Ukrainians received permission from the Western countries, they start using these opportunities, these possibilities massively. Furthermore, we have another report that the Russians lost another division of S-400, S-300 air defense systems. On this video, according to information we have, the Ukrainians, as a result of HIMARS strike, destroyed the concentration of Russian air defense systems somewhere in the vicinity of Belgorod. Currently, we don't know for sure the damage the Ukrainians managed to deal the Russians, but as you can see based on the videos, most likely the damage was very heavy. Furthermore, we have additional updates about the territory, and just I would like to point your attention that just today on Monday, on the 3rd of June, as you can see, we received significant number of geolocations, significant number of videos of the use of the Western weapon, long-range missiles, HIMARS missiles, not of course attack missiles, significant number of drones. And if summarize everything, at least if you ask my opinion, everything reminds me some special media operation from the Ukrainian side, where they tried to show Ukrainian soldiers that we received permission from the Western countries, we made significant results, so don't worry, now everything is going to be okay. So all these three updates about the missile strikes, drone strikes, show us just the attempt from the Ukrainian side to, let's say, to break the situation, at least in minds of Ukrainian soldiers. On the other hand, we continue receiving videos of redeployment of Russian forces. More and more tanks, armored vehicles, artillery systems, trucks are heading to the line of combat contact. So the Russians are also very serious on Belgorod direction or Kharkiv direction, and they continue concentration forcing. Despite complete absence of any progress on the ground, the Russians continue concentration of forces along the border. When talking about the situation itself, we got also very interesting report that the Russians on this direction start using the new type of artillery system. It's 152 millimeter, let's say, artillery gun, 2S-43 Malva. So as you can see, this is the artillery, the first type of artillery system that isn't like Russian old artillery systems that they use completely different type of, let's say, moving parts. So this is completely different, let's say, architecture. So the Russians are trying to create not just powerful artillery systems, but also fast, mobile, and the most important, fast, mobile, and of course long-range artillery systems. Now let's move to the situation on the ground. We haven't received almost anything from Глубокое, Liptsy, Lukiansk. Both sides, either the Russians and the Ukrainians, continue concentration of forces. The only report we have is that the Ukrainians conducted few counterattacks with significant number of armored vehicles, but yet by the end, let's say by the evening of the 3rd of June, we still haven't received any updates confirming those attempts to attack. When talking about Vovchansk, we have significant number of videos, but we haven't received even a single video confirming additional progress either of the Russians or of the Ukrainian side. We have the video published by the Ukrainian sources of the common situation in Vovchansk. As you can see, the city was already reduced to ruins. Most of the bridges were already destroyed. These drones show us citadel, the central heart, the heart of Vovchansk defense operation from the Ukrainian side. We see that the church wasn't damaged neither by the Russians nor by the Ukrainian side. But the most important is that citadel still under Ukrainian control, and that the Russians still haven't managed to establish control over it. This is the central part of defense of Vovchansk. This is the area. On the other hand, the Ukrainians continue publishing the video of how they were bombing and attacking the Russian forces also in the south, in the southern part of northern Vovchansk. Now let's move further to the south in Vovchansk. The Russians, as you can see, continue pummeling and bombing this territory with significant number of artillery strikes, FAP arrivals, as you can see. So this is the current situation. As you can see, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are able to counter-attack each other. The Russians can't continue offensive operation. The Ukrainians can't counter-attack and to restore control over the lost territories. So this is, let's say, a very, very interesting situation. It's very difficult to understand how the situation is going to be developed later and in the future. Now let's move further to the northern Kupiansk direction. We have additional updates from the territory. When talking about northern Kupiansk area, the Russians continue bombing and destroying the Ukrainian bridges in the area, and probably maybe for the 30th time in a row the Russians are destroying the same bridge. The Ukrainians found a solution how to restore the bridges very fast. So if the Russians destroy a bridge, usually it takes the Ukrainians up to 10-20 days and they're able to restore and start using the bridge once again. And as you can see on this video, we can see arrivals of FAPs and the result of strikes, and once again the bridge was destroyed that Ukrainians were using to supply and support their forces in the vicinity of Kislovka-Kotlarovka. Also, the Russians were bombing not just the bridges but also warehouses. The Russians were bombing the temporary positions, the concentration of forces, but once again without any changes and without any attempts to attack on this direction on the ground. We continue receiving reports from Mesazharivka, Stelmakhovka. Yet we haven't received any geolocations confirming the Russian progress, but we have significant number of videos of how the Russians were bombing and pummeling the Ukrainian positions in Stelmakhovka itself. So the Russians are still preparing the foothold before further offensive operation, but for now there were no attempts to attack. Also, some Russian sources reported that as a result of offensive, the Russians improved their positions in Novoyegorovka, and if summarize every single report we received during the day, this is the territory that is probably and most likely under complete Russian control, but yet without any geolocations or confirmations. Now let's move to Siversk direction. We have additional updates. The Russians continue hunting the Ukrainian artillery systems, Ukrainian positions. We have more videos of how the Russians continue hunting the Ukrainian artillery systems. On this video we can see that as a result of Lancet strike, another Ukrainian howitzer was destroyed. The Russians continue clearing Sporna. This is the focal point of the Russian forces, yet without any attempts to attack the territory on the ground. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians mainly were focused to use FPV drones and to clear the basements where most likely were concentration of Ukrainian forces. So anyway, everything tells us that most likely the Russians are about to start operation, but we are talking like this every day, and every day the Russians are not doing anything. Now let's move to Chasiv Yar direction. We have additional updates from the northern part. Some mappers have adjusted the map. Very reliable mappers confirmed the video information that the Russians crossed Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal, managed to establish a foothold here. Some Russian sources reported that the Russians control not just the Lisova street but every single building in the village by the name of Kalinovka. This is it on the Russian side of Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal, and just the farms and the barracks that located to the north of the village still under Ukrainian control. We are talking about this territory, but most likely these farms, these buildings, these barracks are going to fall very soon under the Russian pressure, because already the Russians have already semi-encircled this territory from the south, from the southeast, from the east, and are about to finish the encirclement from the north and eastern part. And after that, the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back from this direction as well. When talking about the new Russian foothold on the Ukrainian side of, let's say, Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours made significant number of attempts to counterattack on Russian positions, trying to force the Russians to fall back. But all videos tell us that the Russians, let's say, made lots of investments, investigations, how to prepare this operation. The Ukrainians made lots of attempts to counterattack, but most of the vehicles that Ukrainians were using were damaged or destroyed somewhere along Lisova Street. Furthermore, the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions all over the entire Chasiv Yar in the central, in the eastern. So a lot of artillery strikes. The Russians are trying to win some time, to give some time to the Russian soldiers on the ground to dig in deeper, to prepare fortifications, to complete rotation, and to, let's say, get ready before, of course, 100% counterattacks from the Ukrainian side. For now, the Ukrainians didn't have possibilities to counterattack, but obviously they're going to get these opportunities very soon. Now let's move further to Avdiivka direction, where we also got significant number of updates, and the most important updates are coming from the village by the name of Sokol. This morning we got report that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to answer Sokol, and according to some Russian sources, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village. This information we received somewhere at 10 a.m. of the local time. Later we got reports that Ukrainians made, let's say, significant attempts to counterattack the Russians, but most of the armored vehicles that were involved in those counterattacks were damaged and destroyed by the Russians. Later we got report from different pro-Russian, very reliable military experts that the Russians did answer Sokol, but for some reason when the Russians reached the central street, the center part, they decided not to dig in deeper but to fall back to Solovyova. So this is the current situation. So basically the Russians attacked Solovyova, the Russians entered Solovyova during the day, but that was recon force or recon in combat. When the Russians collected the necessary information, they abandoned their positions and continued bombing the village itself. But anyway, if the Russians already entered the village, most likely during the next few days, the village will be captured completely. Now let's move further to the south. We have significant progress of the Russians in the vicinity of Nitailova. We have the first geolocations confirming that the Russians managed to answer, to bypass Nitailova itself and to answer the eastern Karlovka. So this is already Karlovka. We received geolocations from the Ukrainian side. On this video, the Ukrainian FPV drone was flying above area and was droning the Russians with grenades, which confirms the Russian, let's say, presence. Maybe not the entire eastern Karlovka under complete Russian control. Maybe there is some resistance from the Ukrainian side, but anyway, during this day and during upcoming night, most likely this entire territory will be captured by the Russians. As you can see, significant progress, and today on the 3rd of June, we can state that official battle for Karlovka has started. Of course, there is still a lot of job to do, and most likely the Russians are not going to move further to the west because there are like border barriers. So for the Russians, it's better to start moving to the south. There are lots of fortifications, lots of very interesting constructions, and most likely during the next few days, if the Russians are going to move further to the south, they will try to capture these farms and these barracks, this industrial zone. Also, the Russians most likely will try to move further to the south in direction of this network of the fortifications, and only after this, the Russians will decide what to do next, either to move further to the western Karlovka, because in this from this configuration Karlovka would be half encircled, or the Russians will try to clear the fields and to clear the positions, let's say, that located to the north east of this red line. So it's Nivoyska, some fortifications on the ground, so there are still a lot of questions about this territory and questions what the Russians are planning to do next. But if the Russians are able to reach this red line, of course this is going to be the end of Krasnogorovka. But most likely by the time the Russians reach this red line, the Ukrainians will fall back from Krasnogorovka completely to the village by the name of Zhelana Druga. So we'll see what is going to be next. When talking about the current status of Krasnogorovka, there are very heavy clashes, significant number of FPV drone strikes and FPV drone bombings, but without any attempts and without any progress on the ground. Now let's move further to the south in direction of Nova Mikhailovka, Konstantinovka. The Russians made lots of attempts to capture Paraskoyevka completely, but another day, another wave of Russian attack was repelled by the Ukrainians. The Russians continue clashes and continue bombings of Ukrainian positions in the north in Konstantinovka. There are farms, there are, let's say, buildings that were under very heavy fire, the buildings that Ukrainians use to, let's say, reinforce and to support their forces in the western part of Paraskoyevka. So the Russians tried to suppress the Ukrainian positions, and after that they launched an offensive, but once again they haven't managed to finish the battle. Now let's move further to Urozhaina, Staromayorska. The Russians continue regular activity, FPV dronings of the Ukrainians in the central part, yet no updates about Staromayorska. Probably the Russians continue the clearing operation, most likely the Ukrainians conducting some counterattacks, so without any updates for another day. The most important things are coming from Velika Novoselovka, and today we got another photos of destroyed bridge. Most of the bridges were destroyed during the previous or damaged during the previous months, and today the Russians published additional batch of video of how they were attacking the bridges that Ukrainians managed to restore during the previous few days. So the Russians are very concentrated on logistic on this direction, trying to destroy logistic completely and basically to force the Ukrainians under the pressure to fall back. Now let's move to Robotyne. We have very important updates. The Ukrainian sources published the video how the FPV droned the Russian soldier in this area, which confirms that as a result of offensive operation, that as a result of offensives during the previous days, the Russians established complete control over this rich network of the fortifications and over the fields that located in the eastern part of Robotina. So significant progress. We see that the Russian FPV drone focus is moving further to the fields, and the Ukrainians are falling back further and further in the direction of Orekhov. On the other hand, we see activization of Russian forces in the vicinity of Zaporizhzhia, in the vicinity of Stepnogorsk, Starokonstantinsk, and so on. Today there was a video of attempts to attack the Ukrainian positions with Russian tank. T-80 was operating on this area, attacking and destroying the Ukrainian positions. As you can see, most of the buildings were already destroyed. So this is another video how T-80 of Russian forces was working. So we can't tell for sure whether the Russians are planning to start offensive on this direction, but during the previous months there was significant number of geolocations. That means most something. For example, since the beginning of May, we can see the concentration of Russian fire, and we see no activity, no response, no resistance from the Ukrainian sources. So this is the situation in Zaporizhzhia. When talking about Kherson, complete absence of any activity, just few ADAP 1500 arrived in the area. The Russians continue reconnaissance operation, and if they discover something, they try to destroy this as soon as possible. Now let's move to political events. We have one of the most important updates that is coming from the Black Sea, and according to the rumors, currently it's just a rumor, that a decision has been made to start shooting down, to start bringing down reconnaissance drones of third countries in the Black Sea. What does it mean? There are, let's say, limited number of countries who has access to the Black Sea. It's Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Georgia, and Turkey, right? And the Russians decided, according to this information, to bring down every single drone, every single aircraft that doesn't belong to any of these countries. So that means shortly that if another global hawk appears in the Black Sea, this global hawk would be destroyed immediately as a result of Russian air defense attack. So of course this might bring to significant escalation, but as I understand, the Russians weren't attacking the drones, let's say, until the Western countries decide to start bombing the territory of Russian Federation with a Western weapon. Now the Russians need to respond somehow, and of course this escalation in the Black Sea, regarding the escalation, can bring the Russians significant results, and maybe they will be able to secure Crimea and Crimean Bridge and the Black Sea itself from the strikes of NATO weapon and Western, let's say, weapon of Western countries. Important updates about political events. The Indian authorities refused to go to the Zelensky-Switzerland peace conference. Somebody from a very, very third, let's say, level authorities, let's say, government officer would take part in this event. The same story we got from the United States of America. Joe Biden finally confirmed that he is not going to take part in this, let's say, event. Just his advisor Jake Sullivan will take part in this situation. So as we can see, most of the countries refuse to visit Switzerland, not just because Zelensky is trying to, let's say, propose something that can't be achieved. We're talking about this peace deal and peace agreement that Zelensky was planning to use as an ultimatum that he would, let's say, force Russia to follow. But the main reason is that nobody recognized Zelensky as the legal president. But when talking about legitimacy of Zelensky himself, today he reported that he will not appeal to the Constitutional Court to confirm his legitimacy. According to the chairman of the president's office for legal affairs, Irina Mudra, there is no reason for this. So Zelensky decided to extend his, let's say, president term, and now he decided that he don't need to confirm this extension from anybody because he is sure that everything is okay. And also we got a very important update that Germany allowed the Ukrainians to use their air defense systems, including Patriots, to bring down the aircrafts on the territory of Russian Federation. So this is significant escalation, which will lead probably to more, let's say, losses from every side. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.